what all can you do with 12 cores? I mean, sure, it'll ensure that every game that you play has a sufficient number of threads to work with. I mean, 24 threads, that's a ton. But even the 3700X checks those boxes with 8 cores and 16 threads and a considerably lower price tag. More on that in this video right here. But the 3900X is special because it's technically the world's first 12-core consumer-grade CPU, and it's priced rather competitively in my opinion at $499. It packs 70 megabytes of combined L2 and L3 cache, max boost frequency of 4.6 gigahertz, which comes in handy for some of our gaming benchmarks especially, and a reasonable 105 watt TDP. So how does it stack up against Intel's comparably priced 9900K? And should you consider one? If you're looking for crisp audio and a comfortable set of cans from a reputable company, check out Sennheiser's HD58X Jubilee headset from Drop. Thanks to new 150 ohm drivers, you can enjoy clean audio from virtually any source, including your smartphone, with extended bass and a defined upper-mid range.
You'll also welcome the Jubilee's incredible dynamic range, meaning you can crank these babies up for undistorted, uninterrupted, unconditionally clean sound. Have I sold you yet?
You can find the HD58X Jubilee from Drop, that's formerly Mass Drop, linked below. Now to briefly run through our test bench, again, we've got the Gigabyte X570 Aorus Master, which handles the 12-core giant with ease. I didn't note this in our last review, but we were running, and are running currently for these tests, the F5C BIOS revision, because BIOSes tend to affect results just slightly. You'll see stock and manual overclock runs here, and depending on the title, you'll find the 3900X does sufficiently well at stock, where Precision Boost and XFR2 are allowed to tailor individual core frequencies to better suit workloads. The same 16 gig kit of Trident ZDDR4 was used with XMP enabled. The graphics card used throughout was an Asus Strix 2080. Our boot drive was a Corsair MP600, compatible with PCIe Gen 4, and our library was stored on a 2TB WD Blue hard drive. You can find all these parts linked down below. The 3900X is an absolute slayer in Cinebench R20, which utilizes each thread to render parts of an image. CPUs with more threads are allowed to render smaller parts of the image simultaneously, which means CPUs with more cores typically do better in this test. Geekbench 4 reveals a similar story. Our single core scores are still a bit shy of the 9900Ks, but another thing you're likely to notice here is how the stock run of the R9 chip is outperforming the overclocked run. This is something we intermittently saw in our 3700X review as well. Long story short, these Zen 2 chips aren't excellent overclockers. A lot of this has to do with how aggressive Precision Boost is by default, and while 12 cores sounds lovely on paper, in practice, many programs still benefit from the occasional single or dual core boost in frequency. We discussed more of that in this video right here. I'm pointing to the same videos I did last time, just emphasizing it because if you haven't seen these yet, it explains why you're seeing what you're seeing. So with that said, the next few productivity benchmarks you'll see will be depicted at stock. The 9900K, sure, could still benefit from a small boost in overall frequency with a manual overclock. And so what I did instead was enable MCE, and it was disabled again for our gaming benchmarks. That's because we showed overclocked and stock runs in the gaming benchmark. So I'll let you know when we make that switch back. Blender was our next test, and here the 3900X dominated the ring. In the BMW render, which is a lot like Cinebench in the way it behaves, more cores at a solid frequency push AMD's R9 chip to render times of only 168 seconds or thereabouts, compared to our 9900K at 220 seconds, almost 1 minute slower. The 3700X, mind you, is not far behind that. Next up is content creation. I could have used DaVinci Resolve or Sony Vegas for these tests, but a popular platform I've used for years is Adobe Premiere Pro. I know how these chips behave typically with the software suite, so I know what to expect, and it's easy to explain. It isn't the most reliable in terms of stability, we're talking about the software itself, but its functions are powerful, and that's why I use it. What you're looking at here are render times for the same 5-minute 4K video clip using the YouTube 4K 40 megabit per second preset. Now, at first glance, you might think something's wrong with my 9900K results. In fact, I noticed a few reviewers showing the 9900K behind the 3900X in similar Premiere tests. However, in my case, I was sure to enable hardware encoding, which requires the install and activation of Intel UHD graphics. There are typically drivers involved along with a BIOS toggle, so it's a multi-step process. That said, it works wonders here, and I'm getting less than a minute for minute render time per minute of footage on my timeline with the 9900K. And this is something comparable AMD chips simply cannot take part in. For that reason, and that reason alone, I haven't switched to Ryzen or Zen 2 for my personal editing rig, but we'll still find plenty of use for a 12-core around the office. And to be completely honest, the 3900X and even the 3700X aren't terrible in this test. So if you wanted to go with this for kind of an awesome all-arounder at a better price, in my opinion, then this would totally make sense. And you could do a lot with 12 cores. The same general rules apply for the next test. Warp Stabilizer is a built-in video effect that it attempts to basically smooth out rough and bouncy footage, and here the Core i9 9900K comes out on top after 600 frames, but the 3900X comes awfully close. I should note that the IGP isn't being used as heavily during this task here, during warp stabilizing. It's used a lot it's used to a greater extent, I should say, in the render scenario. So that is why the 9900K doesn't have as much of a lead as it did in the prior test. I should also note that without the IGP, the Core i9 would lose handily, but I'm not going to gimp the Intel chip, especially given the fact that I use this hardware acceleration on a near daily basis. I just feel like that would be unfair for the blue team. If these had IGPs, I'd be using them too. I will say, however, that other editing suites like DaVinci Resolve generally favor higher core counts in general, in which case I would expect the 3900X to render and warp faster. So it all really depends on the programs of which you take advantage. That's no surprise, really. Speaking of advantage, streaming is likely to be a popular use case for this CPU and really any of these CPUs in this chart. The 3900X, to my surprise, didn't improve much in the way of streamer side FPS, but no drop frames were observed for any of these tests on the viewer side, which is good. This was with the X264 encoder, by the way. I don't typically use NVENC with gaming streaming. It just doesn't make sense to me. I would rather use X264, especially if I have a higher core count CPU. So in short, your outcomes will largely depend on the games you play. GTA 5 doesn't tend to saturate 16 threads, so additional headroom can be levied by the encoder at virtually no expense of frame rate. Well, okay, there's like around a 10% dip overall when compared to our raw GTA 5 benchmarks, but it isn't something you're likely to complain about when your viewers are seeing a buttery smooth 60 FPS stream. My recommendation, if you're gonna be just streaming and gaming and you wanna buy a new CPU, the 3700X is the best value of the lot. In 3D Mark Time Spy, the 3900X's 12 cores comes in handily, actually edging out a victory overall thanks to a crispy CPU score, pushing overall scores well in excess of 11,000 points. The 9900K and 3700X are neck and neck, and the 2700X suffers to an extent on account of IPC and boost clocks. By the way, the 3700X, 9900K, and 2700X results that you see from here on out will be with the stock run, so no MCE enabled, as well as the overclocked 5 GHz, 4.3 and 4.2 respectively, and these are the exact same results you saw in our 3700X review. Now you already saw GTA 5 in this video, but I'm going to show it again along with a side-by-side comparison of gameplay between the 3700X, 3900X, and 9900K. I'm getting so tired of saying these names. By the way, you're only going to see the first 16 threads because showing 24 in the case of the 3900X required me to shrink this font down to a point where it would have been pretty difficult to view on certain devices. Needless to say, you can see that several threads that you can see bounce in and out of existence, so having 24 threads instead of 16 isn't really going to change much in the way of performance for this game. This trend continues, by the way, to other games as well. We saw a small improvement in Fortnite, but nothing worth freaking out about. Our 9900K retained the lead among averages and the lowest 1% of frames, and the 3900X offered only a small improvement over its 8-core counterpart. Resident Evil was a similar story. In fact, for some reason, our 3900X performed worse overall, even after 3 averaged runs, which all of these are, by the way. We averaged 3 different frame times across the entire frame spectrum, so some of these benchmarks recorded like thousands of frames. We average all of those frame times and then come up with a standardized average that you're seeing here in these graphs. But if we have outliers, like an occasional, it'll be like a random spike out of nowhere, and it only shows up in one test and no other CPUs exhibit this, then we get rid of that. We throw that out, we consider it an outlier, and so that's the whole thing. If it's repeatable, if you can see it multiple times in your experimenting, then that is something to take into consideration. If it's not repeatable, if it just shows up one time, you consider it an outlier. There are several variables that could have been at play that we can't control, and that's why they won't be included in our data. Shadow of the Tomb Raider, however, is an exception. Check out thread utilization in the scene. I do expect a few newer AAA titles will follow suit in the coming months and years, but again, this isn't the norm, and you shouldn't expect it to be for several years, despite whatever consoles are doing. I've heard a few people say, well, consoles are standardized, because the PC industry is totally different, right? Consoles are standardized. Everyone has the same unit. They're all the same Xbox. They're all the same PS5, whatever, right? We're talking about specific generations here. But on PC, it's a different ball game, right? Everyone has a different system for the most part. It's a, someone could have a Pentium, another person could have a Core i7, someone else could have a Core i9, someone else could have a Threadripper. How do you account for all of that? Most systems running with half as many cores as what comes in this will fare just as well in most titles, and that's what devs want. They don't want to leave a bulk of their audience, in fact, the vast majority of their audience behind, because the fact is most people are using lower core count chips still, and if you optimize for higher core counts, then you're going to penalize those who have lower core count chips. That's one viewpoint that I want you to consider going forward, because you shouldn't be surprised that the 3900X isn't that much better than the 3700X. I mean, let's be real. Who games exclusively with a 12-core CPU? It just doesn't make sense. But okay, enough rambling. Skipping ahead a bit, we have Witcher 3. Performance between the 3900X and 9900K is nearly identical here. This is actually good news. Fills in the small gap the 3700X left behind, but I, again, wouldn't advise spending a little under $200 more for a few extra frames. F1 2017 behaved in a similar fashion. The 3900X closes the gap, but the price isn't justified for a pure gaming scenario. It's the same for PUBG and Universe Sandbox 2. More cores sounds great on paper, but the actual practicality of them for gaming is just not there for me. Now, look, don't get me wrong, the 3900X is an incredible CPU at this price, but for nearly $200 less, you could cop a 3700X and enjoy 95% of the frame rates. And I have a feeling I'll say the same thing about the 3600. So stay tuned for that review when we get our hands on a sample. That's honestly what this comes down to, right? Most games don't care whether you have 6 or 12 cores, so it depends on your use case, really. If you're streaming quite a bit along with intensive gaming, then I'd say the 8-core is the sweet spot, to be completely honest with you. Sure, the 6-core could handle it as well, but I like having a bit of breathing room for the future. I mean, future-proofing is an overused term, but to be completely honest, if games are already saturating to at least a decent extent 6 cores and 12 threads, I wouldn't be surprised if in a few years 8 cores becomes the new 6-core. As for the 12-core though, it's just it's a totally different story. I mean, you're paying a lot more, right? Serious content creators can consider this. It's an option, but again, it's going to depend on the program. In my case, the 3700X would be a significantly better buy. Save the extra money, throw it into a better graphics card maybe, and you'll be happier. I honestly believe this. I think you'll benefit from a much beefier graphics card at this point, anything at 8 cores or above, right? So my recommendation is for the 3700X at this point. A vast majority of you could benefit from a better graphics card past 8 cores. Again, if you're compiling or running VMs, consider the 12-core instead. It should be that simple, but I still have a feeling a few of you are going to buy the 12-core just to say that you have a 12-core because you think it's future-proof or because it sounds cool. And look, I've got news for you. The 8-core is already future-proof. But anyway, with that, I'll leave you to decide what's best for your money, for your wallet. And yeah, based on what you've seen in this video and others, I'm sure you'll make at least a somewhat informed decision. Do not buy a 12-core just to say you have one. Thanks for watching. Subscribe, click on that bell, become a member. Stay tuned for more. You guys know the drill. This is Science Studio. Thanks for watching again, and thanks for learning.